By the time it was over, employees at one of the most trusted banks in America had opened as many as 3.5 million accounts. Checking accounts, savings accounts, credit cards, for customers who never asked for them, and in many cases never even knew they existed. Real people, real names, real social security numbers, used without permission to hit a sales target. But here's what makes this different from every other story on this channel. There was no mastermind in a straw hat, no single con artist. The people opening those accounts were ordinary bank employees, tellers, personal bankers, branch managers, terrified of losing their jobs. So how does fraud on that scale happen at a respected American bank? Not because of one greedy person, but because of the system they built. I spent years working inside banks like this one, and I can tell you exactly how it happens. This is Trail of Greed, where we follow the money behind history's biggest financial crimes. Last time, we met Charles Ponzi. One man, one lie. Today is different. Today, the greed wasn't in a person. It was engineered into a company, quota by quota, until thousands of decent people were pushed into doing something they knew was wrong. This one's personal for me. Let's follow the trail. Before we get to Wells Fargo, I want you to understand something most people never see: what it actually feels like to work on the floor of a big retail bank. Because a bank doesn't just want you to have an account, it wants you to have more accounts. A checking account, then a savings account, then a credit card, then a line of credit, then overdraft protection. In the industry, this is called cross-selling, and the more products a customer has, the harder it is for them to ever leave. So banks set targets, daily targets. How many new products did you open today? Those numbers get tracked, ranked, and posted. Your manager sees them. Their manager sees them. And if you're at the bottom of the list, you hear about it. In the morning huddle, in the one-on-one, in the quiet conversation about whether this job is really for you. Now, most banks stay on the right side of this. Pressure to sell isn't a crime. But I want you to hold that feeling in your head. The feeling of a number you have to hit every single day, or you might not eat next month. Because that feeling is the entire story of what happened at Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo took that ordinary pressure and they turned the dial all the way up. And then they kept turning. For years, Wells Fargo was the envy of the banking world, admired specifically because it was so good at cross-selling. Its customers held more products per household than almost any competitor. Wall Street loved it. Investors loved it. The stock soared. Inside the bank, the goal had a name. The target was 8 products per customer. The slogan, 8 is great. Why 8? According to the bank's own leadership, there was no deep financial reason. It just rhymed. 8 products per household. Chosen because it rhymed. That was the number thousands of employees were told to hit, and the pressure was relentless. Federal investigators and the bank's own review later described a culture of aggressive, near-impossible daily sales goals. Employees were pushed to hit targets hour by hour, fall short, and you faced being written up, publicly ranked, or pushed out the door. So picture the choice these employees faced. Hit a number that may have been mathematically impossible to hit honestly, or lose the job feeding your family. Some quit. Some reported it and were ignored, or worse. And some, thousands of them, did the thing the system was quietly pushing them toward. They started making the numbers up. Here's what making the numbers up actually meant. And the mechanics matter because this is where ordinary sales pressure crossed the line into fraud. Employees began opening accounts that customers never requested. They opened checking and savings accounts in real customers' names. using those customers' real personal information without ever telling them. They issued credit cards nobody applied for. To enroll customers in online banking and hit those targets, some employees created fake email addresses the customer didn't even know existed. And here's the cruelest part. To make a brand new fake account look active so it would count, employees sometimes moved a customer's own money out of their real account and into the fake one. The customer's real balance would drop. They'd get hit with overdraft fees or monthly fees on an account they never opened. Some saw their credit scores damaged by cards they never asked for. Think about that. The fraud wasn't aimed at some faceless institution. It landed directly on the bank's own customers, the people who trusted them most. Investigators eventually concluded this wasn't a few bad branches. It was systemic, stretching back, by regulators' accounts, to at least 2002. Internal warnings reportedly reached senior leadership as early as 2004, flagging the problem years before the public ever heard about it. When the dust settled, the estimate of potentially unauthorized accounts started at around 2 million, and after a deeper review, climbed to as many as 3.5 million. For years, this stayed hidden in plain sight, until the press started pulling the thread. Investigative reporting, notably by the Los Angeles Times, began exposing the brutal sales culture and the practices it produced. Then, in September 2016, the regulators landed. Wells Fargo agreed to pay a combined $185 million to settle with federal and city authorities. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's share, $100 million, was the largest fine that agency had ever issued up to that point. And the bank's response told you everything about where it pointed the blame. Wells Fargo revealed it had fired roughly 5,300 employees over the conduct. 5,300. The tellers and bankers at the bottom, the ones who'd been squeezed by the quotas, were fired by the thousands. The slogan that set the targets? That came from the top. The outrage went national. The CEO, John Stumpf, was hauled before Congress and grilled on live television. Senators demanded to know how a man who'd run the bank for years could claim he didn't know. He insisted, in essence, that the vast majority of employees had done it right, even as his company had fired thousands and the public watched. It was not a good look, and it was about to get a lot worse for the people at the top. Within weeks of that testimony, John Stumpf was out, resigning as CEO in October 2016. But this time, unlike a lot of corporate scandals, the consequences reached the executives. Wells Fargo's board clawed back tens of millions of dollars in stock and pay from Stumpf and from Carrie Tolstedt, the executive who had run the giant community bank division at the heart of the scandal. All told, the bank recovered well over $180 million in executive compensation. Then the regulators went after the individuals directly. In early 2020, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency fined Stumpf $17.5 million and banned him from the banking industry for life. Carrie Tolstedt faced even more. In 2023, she pleaded guilty to a federal charge of obstructing a bank examination. She was sentenced to home confinement and probation, banned from banking for life, and ordered to pay millions. She remains the only executive to face a criminal sentence in connection with the scandal. And in February 2020, Wells Fargo agreed to pay $3 billion to resolve the criminal and civil investigations into its sales practices. But the punishment that hurt the most wasn't a fine. In 2018, the Federal Reserve did something almost unheard of. It capped the size of Wells Fargo. The bank was forbidden from growing its total assets beyond where they stood at the end of 2017, frozen in place until it could prove it had fixed its culture and its controls. For one of the largest banks in America, that was a straitjacket. While its rivals grew, Wells Fargo stood still. For years. So how does it end? In June 2025, after roughly 7 years, the Federal Reserve finally lifted the asset cap. The bank had spent the better part of a decade rebuilding under new leadership, paying out billions, and trying to convince regulators it had changed. Only then was it allowed to grow again. But here's the part I want you to sit with. The reason this story matters more than the dollar figures. Charles Ponzi was one greedy man with one lie. You can point at him. This was different. At Wells Fargo, no single villain dreamed up open millions of fake accounts. Instead, the company built a machine. Impossible targets, relentless ranking, real fear of losing your job. And that machine quietly manufactured fraud out of thousands of ordinary people who, on any other day, would never have done it. That's the thing I learned working inside this world. The most dangerous greed usually isn't a person. It's a number on a wall that someone above you cares about more than the truth. Make that number impossible. Attach people's livelihoods to it, and you don't need a mastermind. The system becomes the mastermind. And that should scare you a lot more than a man in a straw hat.
So I want to hear from you. And be honest. If you were a bank employee, told to hit an impossible number every day or lose the job feeding your family, what would you have done? Drop it in the comments. I read and reply to everyone in the first hour. If this is your first time here, this channel breaks down the biggest financial crimes in history, one every week. We go the other direction entirely. A single trader, hiding his losses in a secret account, who personally destroyed a 233-year-old bank, the bank that held the Queen's money. That's Nick Leeson and the Fall of Barings. Follow the money, follow the trail.